This is episode 18 in my series entitled Spiritual Lessons from the Time of Nero. I've had they're not complaints, but I have had some comments that have been made about the fact that I'm on episode, this was after the last one, 17 episodes, Eric, and you haven't really even talked about the history between 64 and 70 AD. And I was like, that's just not true. I told you that in 64 AD, Nero burned Rome. I told you that in 64 AD, that began because he blamed it on the Christians. It created the Great Persecution. And they start nodding along like, oh yeah, you have told us that, haven't you? And then in 68 AD, Nero committed suicide. And I said that initiated the Roman civil wars. 3 emperors in 1 year, and then the 4th emperor that is going to come in 1 year, Vespasian, is going to then take over and bring order back to the empire and then return back to the wars against the Jews. And it's going to create a 3.5-year war with the Jews, which is going to it's going to end on Tisha B'Av, which is sort of like our August in the Jewish calendar, but it's a significant date amongst the Jews' history. And it's going to finish with the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, which has, as I've said many times, never been rebuilt. Significant event in history. And so, but I'm going to agree. I have not gone into much detail. I have hinted at a lot of things. But there's a reason for that, and that is that I'm not just teaching history here. I'm teaching us as the church how we can navigate through what is taking place in this time, which has import. We have divided as the church over this time, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just history, right? But the import and the implications of this history are significant. For instance, and this is just to sort of whet your appetite if you want to go back to the first 17 episodes and understand what Eric is trudging through. That's a terrible way of saying it, because I'm not trudging through it. I am frolicking through it. I am delighting, as I'm going through this. This has been tremendously pleasurable. I'm dealing with very difficult topics, but it's been very fun. And I think anyone that has gone through the first 17 episodes would say the same. It's actually surprisingly beautiful looking at some of these topics that have been surprisingly traumatic and painful to many of us before. And that's part of what my desire is to remove the barnacles and to remove the oppression that the devil has set upon the issues that I am going through. And of course, you could say, what issues are you going through, Eric? Well, I could go through a list of things, which I started with in the series, but you have things like Daniel's prophecies, the 70 weeks. Oh boy, there's certain people that just would want to walk out of the room the moment I bring stuff like that up. It's like, oh, that's for a certain type of person. I'm not that type of person. Or how about the book of Revelation, the Great Tribulation? Things like that are so unattractive to many people in the church, but there's a sector of the church that is very fascinated with it. But here's what's interesting, is this time period, 64 to 70 AD, is divisive because of how it's viewed. And the book of Revelation does not have a date on it. And so there are many people like myself, all growing up, when I would, try and position the book of Revelation in my understanding in history when it was written in 95 to 96 AD, right? And then there's this whole contingent on the other side that's going to say, Eric, who told you that? Where did that come from? Because it's obviously written before the Great Persecution broke out in 64 AD. I'm like, what kind of kook is that would say that? And so what we have is division over what is written, when it is written, because if it is written in 64 AD, just hypothetically, then what is going to take place between 64 and 70 AD would be directly after it. And if you read the book of Revelation as if it was written then, it is startling how it changes and creates a different coloring to it. And so you can see how the church throughout the last 2,000 years has had a very difficult time. We have camps. We have futurists, we have preterists. Futurists are those that think that the prophecies of the New Testament, the prophecies, specifically the Mount of Olives discourse, and the prophecies of Revelation are still to come. Then you have another camp, which is called the preterists, which means it's already happened. And so they feel that it was fulfilled. Well, great. And that creates a nice climate for us to enter into because it creates a consternation amongst us. The preterists really struggle with the futurists. The futurists really struggle with the preterists. right? I could say, welcome to Christianity. But then you take the futurists, and you could divide the futurists into 10 camps. And then you could take the preterists, and you could divide the preterists into 10 camps. And by the way, both have their kooks, and both have their very reasonable salt of the earth varieties. And the challenge that I face is, okay, we've been commissioned by Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians to actually be of one mind as the church, to agree. Now, I know he was speaking to one church, right? Just this church at Corinth, which was a mess at the time and did not agree. But I would also like to apply that to the global church to say there is no reason, if Paul is going to speak that to the church at Corinth, that he also wouldn't be speaking it to us with the design and the desire to see us knit together in love to showcase the invisible realm to this world. That we would be the instrument that God uses, known as the church. But to do that, we have to know how to handle that which is dividing us. Because we can unite on Jesus, his cross, the sufficiency of his word. We can say, yes, 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 amen, and then say, but I can't have fellowship with you, dear brother, because you think these things are still to happen. I can't have fellowship with you, dear brother, because you think they already did happen. That is very dangerous for us, and that's why I'm walking through this. I'm actually trying to give perspective on why people have struggled with these things and how it has been leveraged against us instead of towards Jesus. The entire book of Revelation, for instance, is called the revelation of Jesus Christ. So what do we see when we look at this book? Do we see Jesus, or do we see coming misery and woe? And your lens with which you use to look at things is very, very important. So in this time period, we have three major parties. We could call them factions or groups. We have Christians, which are going to be very, very significant think about AD 64 is when sort of this time period that I'm going to be focusing on as we move forward more and more and more. Jesus is going to die somewhere around, I'm just going to say 32 AD. And I'm not saying that because that's a scientific enunciation of it. It's interesting because we do know that John the Baptist is going to start his ministry in the 15th year of Tiberius, which would have been 29 AD. So it's like we have these like unique things where we can create a time zone for things, but we don't have exact dates, which is very frustrating for someone like me who likes numbers and likes things to be exact. But I don't have that, and God seems to have purposely not given it to us, which is another observation that is important for us to take in. God gives us exactly what we need, and if he's not putting something in, there's a purpose for that too. Because there's a lot of things we do know exactly, and there's a lot of things we don't. And then the question is, Eric, are you going to be fine if you don't know that? Does that change your perspective on me? How are you going to relate to others in not knowing that? So when people become dogmatic about the wrong things, like, this had to have happened right here. It's like, hey, let's hold that loosely. We know it's in this zone of time. I'm going to say 30 to 32 to 33 AD. And so this is going to be the advent or the beginnings of this thing called the Church of Jesus Christ. Pentecost comes 50 days after Passover. And so we're going to see, that's what Penta even means, 50. And so it's 7 sevens and the day after is the celebration of the wheat harvest. And so we're going to have Pentecost, and it is going to be the beginning of something new, which is the beginning of God utilizing the bodies of men and women as his temple. Jesus is going to depart from the temple the last time, about 3 days before he's going to die, and he's going to make it clear that this temple's days are numbered, that not one stone will remain upon another. He is exiting the temple. Think about that. God Almighty is exiting the temple built with human hands, and he is entering a new temple system, a new sacrificial worship system. No longer is it this Judaic system that has been. It is now a new system. It is called Christianity. That's how we know it. It is the way God intended it. He is restoring something that was lost in the garden, and now he's establishing it. And of course, the destruction of Jerusalem and that temple become very, very significant in light of what Jesus is doing at the cross. It is a complete outflow of it, very even logically, we could say. And so this is the time period in which we are in. Our first party are the Christians. Second party are the Jews. Now, it's sometimes difficult, and I'm probably going to have an entire message just on Judaism in this time period because it's hard for us because we are big fans of Jews. That has a tendency to be a marker for people like us. We love God. We love the Old Testament. We love God's history. We love how God was revealed to the Jewish people, and we see how it was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. However, there are going to be Jews that are going to crucify Jesus, that are going to not believe in their Messiah that they have been told about, and it's a disaster, it's a crisis, and Jesus is not going to be happy with them. And this group, we could say, this generation that is going to reject and crucify Christ is going to come under judgment. And this very generation, the greatest persecution of the church was not from Rome. It was from the Jews. But we could say the unbelieving Jews, if we need to clarify that, because it's, the entire church was built out of Judaism. So all the disciples were Jewish. Jesus himself was Jewish. So it's Jewishness is not the problem. It's the faith or not faith is the key, the crux of the matter. The true Israel throughout history is always those that have faith in the Messiah. And so God is separating out sheep from goats, wheat from tares, virgins with oil, virgins without. And there is going to be a judgment in 70 AD on this generation that has rejected Jesus. And so it's a very interesting thing that most of us haven't pondered, but it's very real to that first century Christianity. The third entity and party in the mix are the Romans. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't other nations at large, other people groups, but these are the prominent players in the storyline that we are facing. So when you go into Revelation and you're going to see 7 hills or 7 kings and all these things, to the first century Christian, that is obviously Rome. It's the city of 7 hills. And so when it talks about these things to the first century, they know exactly what it's talking about. When it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, and then it says the place where our Lord was crucified, it's like, wait a minute, I thought Sodom and Gomorrah was over here. No, it's actually taking a symbol of Sodom and Gomorrah and tying it to Jerusalem. The place where our Lord is crucified, I think we know where that is. And so you see these symbols that are talking about Rome and the Jewish people and the Christians. You see these 3 zones that are being isolated out. And it's like, I know where I want to be. I don't want to be in the world. I don't want to be in the rejecting religious system. I want to be in Christ by faith. And so this is going to be a message that's going to give us a cultural insight into what is going to be taking place when we're arriving at 64 AD. And, I've pondered if this is helpful to the discussion. And it is, but it's culturally to understand this, do you have to know it? Well, it will play into it. When you start understanding what Nero is going to do in the Great Persecution, it will play in, and you'll understand it a little more. However, my goal with it is a hearty exhortation that you will catch near the end. So part 18, the Ludi Circus. How did my name get into this? Guys, this is what it's called, okay? The Ludi Circus. So here's my statement. To understand the time of Nero, you must understand the Ludi. I know I'm actually talking about a historical thing that is called that. Now, very likely it was called the Ludy or something like that. It had some different Latin expression to it, but that's what it's called historically. The Romans called it the Ludi or the Ludy, and it just happens to be central to their culture. Isn't that just weird for Eric, who just happens to be toting around this name? Because it's not necessarily a positive thing. So the Ludy, what is the Ludy? So I have some options of what the Ludy is. Now, this was a picture taken quite a few years ago by me, actually, of my Ludy family. And then you see Hudson there. Now, Hudson's going to take the camera, and there's Daddy in his place. And I had been having some troubles with Kip, who's on the far right that day, and he'd been goofing off and messing around. And so I'd corrected him probably upwards of 100 times by this point. And now you're in photo mode. You don't want to be upset. And so we're all smiling. And at this exact point, what's funny is Kip is actually smiling, which isn't the easiest thing to get him to do in a picture, right? And he's doing that right there. But Hudson makes a statement and says, "Kip, stop making funny faces." Something like that, right? But that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Daddy had had enough of that. If he's not going to take our family picture and he's going to make funny faces in it. So I have a certain method of correcting my kids, and it's called the pinch. And so I reached around, as you will now watch Daddy closely here. There's the pinch. And you look at Kip's response. And then we had Hudson is like just taking a sequence of pictures here. Daddy then gets back into photo mode, and I'm smiling. And then Kip falls out of the screen. So let's go back through that. That's an important sequence. So there's the pinch. It's the moment. You can look at different characters in the Ludy family. It's really funny. And then, and so that was the results of Daddy's pinch. Not the best idea, technically, if you want Kip smiling the rest of the pictures, right? But, sometimes as a parent, you react and you look back and it's caught on film and it's not your prettiest moment. But this could be called the Ludi Circus right here, right? So the Ludi Circus is not to be mistaken with the Ludi family circus, a common mistake. The ancient Ludi were the Roman Empire's primary sport and entertainment. Now, to try and even get you to understand how big of a deal this was in the most powerful nation on earth, the ancient Ludi were the Roman Empire's primary sport and entertainment. It would be the ancient equivalent of Hollywood, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, MLB, and NASCAR all rolled into one gigantic public spectacle. This is something else, is what I could say. I mean, you think the Super Bowl's big. This is nonstop, constant in this culture, and it is a rousing display of fanaticism. So there's another common mistake of mixing up Eric Ludy's Family Circus with Bill Keene's Family Circus comic strip. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bill Keene's Family Circus comic strip. It's actually really fun. So I have an illustration of it here. I grew up with this and always found it humorous. And it always has this dad and mom and like 4 kids, and it has this one dog. And this is just so funny. The dad at the table, they're sitting at the dinner table, all of them. And the dog's begging, waiting there for the baby to drop something. I mean, everything about this is like if you've had a dog in your home and he's very smart. He knows exactly where to hang out, right? So the dad says, all right, who is kicking the table? And then all going around, one kid says, nobody. And then one kid says, not me. And then the girl says, I don't know. And then the little baby's thinking a bubble thought going, not me. And then down below, you have these like ghost characters that are kicking the table, and they're called not me, I don't know, nobody. And it's like, now that is the Ludi family circus if I've ever heard it. Okay, who did this? And no one ever does it. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that. No one ever does it. There's these ghost characters that are doing it. So I thought that was good. But not to be confused. This is not what I'm talking about, guys, okay? So even though it's a common misconception. So previously on Daily Thunder, the name Ludy has made its way into different series that I've done. So for instance, in my World War II series, we have the Battle of Ludy Gulf. It's actually Ludy Gulf, but it was strangely similar to Ludy, even in how it's pronounced. It's like Ludy, and it's like, well, are they saying my name? And it's a significant battle. And then I have another message in my World War I series called The Other Eric. And the guy's name is Erich Ludendorff. Now, it would be great if Erich Ludendorff was a heroic character. He just happens to be sort of one of the chief villains in World War I. In all of my series, one of the chief villains. Of course, the Germans themselves are a villain in my World War I series. I'm German, so I can say these things. But then their leadership, he's going to start, lower ranks, but he is going to show himself quite amazing. I mean, I would like to associate with his boldness, his heroism, because he's quite the heroic character. But he is going to ultimately be over the armed forces. He's going to be like the commander-in-chief of the German army by the end of World War I. And he is going to be the main sponsor of what's called the stab in the back theory, which is going to ultimately lead to Germany's reprisals in World War II. And he's going to be the main sponsor of a guy named Adolf Hitler. So now, the reason that's awkward for me is not just because he has a similar sounding name. It's not just similar sounding. Think about this. My mom's maiden name is Obendorf. My dad's name, Ludy. My name's Eric. Eric, if you were to blend my parents' names, it would be Erich Ludendorff. So I have a buddy named Aaron Burns, and he says, yeah, I have the same problem. Aaron Burr, so it's like you feel like it's part you. Like if I went bad, I would be Aaron Burr. That's like if I went south, I would be Eric Ludendorff. So maybe you have a character in history that sort of could be that for you, but I think all of us need it. We need to just look ourselves in the mirror and go, I don't want to turn out like that guy. But he's like close enough that you feel like there's shades of you there. So I've gone back to the word Ludy many times, but it's just funny how it just comes up in my messages. So the word to the Romans, the name of it was Ludi Circus, and I'm not going to say this probably correctly. I don't speak Roman, but Ludi Circensis. And that translates to the circus games. So I don't know if you can figure out what Ludy means, but it means the games. That it's the games. I mean, this was a huge deal to the Romans. And so this is where we get our word circus. So it was the Ludi Circus, the circus games. So the Ludi Circensis, or the 5 games, you had the chariot races, you had the gladiatorial contests, you had the wild beast hunts, you had the public executions in the arena, and you had the sea battles. Now, I'm not going to go into the sea battles today, but let it suffice to say that they would literally reenact famous battles of the sea, and they would create man-made lakes where hundreds of thousands of people could surround the lake and watch as ships went out there and really fought each other to reenact and killed each other to reenact. I mean, they would do this. I mean, it was exotic, elaborate, and death was usually a part of these things. And it was noble to die in the arena or to die in the games or to die in the sea battles. So the cultural absorption, the entire culture was aware of the games. So if you were in this culture, there's no way you could be detached from it. It was just part and parcel of how the culture worked. It was in the bloodstream of it. You could be in our culture and not follow football. You could not be in the Roman culture and not follow the games. I'm just saying it was a cultural absorption to the point of rabid, feral, and fanatical behavior. I don't know that I've ever heard the term feral used in describing sports, following, but I decided to throw it in because I have no explanation for this other than feral, which means like a return to bestial form, sort of like what Nebuchadnezzar is going to have happen to him. So I just have some pictures that I'll throw in just to sort of show you how humans throughout history and even today respond to the same thing. There is something in every culture that draws this same sort of rabid thing, adherence to a sport. Like people, like we would say, whoa, bud, you're way too into this. And yet it's almost as if, and this is what we're going to set you up for, it's almost as if we are designed to get really into something. The problem is if you don't have the right thing to get into, you turn into this guy who's known as Mr. Blue. The choosing of your color. So back in ancient Rome, 1st century Rome, everyone had a color. You had to choose your team. Or, it was actually called a faction of all things. It was called a faction, if you could believe it. You have to choose your faction, facciones. That might be a little bit of my Spanish mixed in there. But they had 4 colors, and I'll go through that. But the choosing of your color, and then the rabid, feral, and fanatical defense of your color. So once you chose your color, you're standing against the other 3 colors. That's your enemy. Now, it can be playful. We all understand that because we have the same thing in our culture where we choose our team. Who's your favorite team? Well, the Denver Broncos. It was always my favorite team. And therefore, I had certain teams that I hated. The Oakland Raiders is what they were known as when I was growing up. And they were evil. I mean, just look at their helmets, black and silver. They were evil. They had, black face paint on. And, one of their cornerbacks used to put goo all over his hands. He cheated. These guys were mean. They would have late hits. They were the enemy. And so I saw orange and blue, and I bled orange and blue to make sure that we beat the Oakland Raiders twice a year. That was what we lived for. And this is actually not unusual to my lifetime. This is actually a part and parcel of human history. So I just have some pictures of how weird people are about this same thing today. So when people get into their sport, they get into their sports like almost as if they're designed for it. It's actually, I loved sports growing up. I mean, I lived and breathed it. I dreamt it. I woke up in the morning. My first desire was to get the sports page, and I wanted to study statistics, anything I could have. I had multiple magazines coming out of the Sporting News, which was like a newspaper that I subscribed to, and I knew the statistics. I knew everything about my players. That is not abnormal to history. That's what's weird, is we think it's just some novelty that's come up in our culture, when in actuality, we're very similar to first century Rome. That's odd. So I just was pondering this, because we've seen this. We've all grown up around this, but this is just a stadium full of cheering people, and guess what? They all are supporting red. And if you are truly going to hang out, if you've ever been in I don't know if this was Kansas City Chiefs. Technically, I just grabbed this picture. But let's say it's the Kansas City Chiefs. If you show up as a Denver Broncos fan, in blue or, you're orange might be able to blend in a little, but you literally are booed by all the surrounding fans. Like, you don't belong here, get out of here. I mean, it's hostile territory. And did you know that back in ancient Rome, riots would break out over games? It's just a game. Yeah, and they would kill each other over games because they would get so mad. Like someone cheated and it wasn't called. And how dare they get, so it's like, kill the ref. We still did that. When I was growing up, I remember hearing threats against refs. Like they wanted to kill the referee. The poor guy, it's just his job. He's a human. He's trying to see through two eyes, but we knew he was biased. I was convinced that Howard Cosell, who was an announcer, was biased against the Broncos. He was always putting down the Broncos, always finding a flaw in them. Get Howard off the air. If there was something that I could sign to remove Howard Cosell from being an announcer, get him out of here. Anyone who stands against the Broncos doesn't deserve to have a microphone. Anyone knows that they're the best team. Okay, do you see any problems? Any challenges that Eric may have growing up? Any stunting to my development when I give way to whatever that is? So the four affections, I'm not exactly sure how to say that. How do you say that in Latin? Facciones? So it is sort of Spanish sounding, right? That's actually what I said, too. I want you guys to know that. I actually may have said it right. The four facciones. And you almost feel like you want to twist your curly mustache when you say the four facciones. What faction are you supporting? Because you have to support a faction. Okay, so which one are you? So the four facciones, what faction are you supporting? The Rusata, the red, Prasina, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing these correct, the green, Albata, the white, or Veneta, the blue. Hey guys, there's only four choices. You have to choose. Now what's interesting is I want you to see that this is so off, so distorted, so non-Christ-like in its behavior, right? And yet it slips into every culture in a certain way because it's like we're wired for this. And what's also interesting is this concept of picking a side. And so if I were to, of course, matching with the series so far, show you, because it's interesting when you deal with the apocalyptic, futurist, preterist, notions of fulfilled prophecy, how we handle the book of Revelation, ironically, there are four camps. Four main camps that I've been going through this whole time. And everyone says, so what's your camp? You have to have a camp. You can't just be like neutral. No, I'm sort of a red-green combo. I like them both. Oh yeah, that means you're not loyal to anyone. That means you're riding the fence, bud. You see, this is the same pressure we have in regards to how we denominationalize. So what denomination are you? Why do we even ask that question? I don't ask people that question. I don't care what denomination. I want to know if they love Jesus, if they tremble before his word, if they truly desire to be found in him, if they know that his cross work is sufficient for them. You see, I'm looking for the most foundational elements of what makes a Christian a Christian. That's what I esteem, not just if they hang out in a church on Sunday. I want to see someone aglow with Jesus Christ. The Roman chariot races. So I'll go through some of these just briefly here. So there's a painting of Roman chariot races, extremely dangerous. See, these are, I think they're called quadratas, which are 4-horse races, extremely dangerous. That there's tremendous power and velocity that can be built up. But they go around this Circus Maximus, which seated 200,000 people in the first century. Do I need to repeat that again? 200,000 people in the first century. That is remarkable. And they had sharp corners, like squared corners. Could you imagine that? And so you could easily, if you tried to ride that corner too tightly, you could clip into the corner and literally going at full speed with 4 horses, just be devastated and then be trampled by those around you. I mean, it was extremely dangerous and extremely exhilarating because of the danger. When something is dangerous, it's interesting how people are extra attracted to it because they don't know if they're watching to see something catastrophic happen or see something just near catastrophic happen. Very interesting how it affects the human psyche. So I'm going to give some fun Ludi facts, and Ludi is spelled L-U-D-I, like the word that we were talking about in ancient Rome. Fun Ludi fact number 1. Roman Emperor Caligula, who was right after Tiberius, was the emperor during Christ's reign. And then after that, you're going to have a guy named Caligula, who was not a healthy character. Sort of hard to find a healthy character in the Roman Empire. But Roman Emperor Caligula was a fanatical, frenzied fan of the Prasina, or the green team. He spent hours in their chariot stables hanging out with the horses and the star charioteers. He often would even eat his meals there. He even made a move, a rather unpopular one, mind you, to place his favorite racehorse in the Roman Senate. Okay, I don't know if you could imagine how well that went over, but literally, he was all about the chariot races. And so what you're going to see is a transformation of Rome where they would have maybe 6 to 12 chariot races a day, and it's going to increase during Caligula's reign to 24. 24 massive spectacles a day. I mean, what do these people do? And then here's another fun Ludi fact number 2. One of the greatest Roman superstar charioteers was, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce any of this right, Gaius Apuleius Diocles. He was a quadriga charioteer, which is a 4-horse thing. This is the 4 horses, the most difficult to guide and control. He is said to have raced 4,257 races, finishing first 1,462 times and second 1,437 times. And he earned the equivalent today of $15 billion in his career, dying at the age of 42. The wealthiest athlete of all history. And he never even spent it. He spent all his days training and riding in chariot races and then died. It's like this weird factoid in history. But that's how much money was in this. I mean, this is the most powerful empire on earth. This is a huge thing. I cannot even imagine riding in 4,257 of these life-threatening races. He survived. I don't know exactly how he died, but of course you have to lean into the thought that maybe it had something to do with this. Fun Ludi fact number 3. During the time of Nero's reign, Rome enjoyed an average of around 24 chariot races per day. The Ludi were a huge part of the Roman citizen's life. Isn't that just weird? It's my name. Maybe it's not weird to you guys because that's not your name, but it's always sort of weird when I see it. So the gladiatorial contests. So there's no easy picture. Sometimes they would do 1 against 1. Sometimes it was a group or a team, like the green team against the red team type of a thing. But there were 14 different types of warriors. And so you would choose as a gladiator in your training which sort of warrior you were going to train to be. And the same type of warriors don't compete against each other. So let's say option 1 doesn't compete against another option 1. Option 1 might compete against the number 7. And they would always match them up in the most intriguing ways. And so that's sort of hard to describe unless I taught on it, which I'm not trying to do here. Fun Ludi fact number 4, what started out as a deeply religious offering to the gods in honor of a slain hero of Rome morphed into a secular way of giving a convicted felon the opportunity to fight for his life. So this used to be like, say, a hero of Rome died. And then you would have these gladiatorial contests where people would be basically offered up as a sacrifice to please the gods. And so they would fight it out. And that their life being, their blood being shed was sort of an offering, but it turned into a spectacle as well. Hey, that's a fun religious ceremony. then it became so popular that the religious side sort of morphed away and it became just a secular thing. And they realized they didn't need to wait for someone to die. They just, hey, let's have a fight. And so they began to use convicted criminals. And it's like, hey, if you show yourself a good fighter, we'll let you live. Doesn't mean they're going to set them free always, but then you keep fighting. And that becomes entertainment, and they can fight to keep their life. Instead of just executing them, hey, let's turn this into some form of entertainment. The gladiatorial rules, the 5 musts. So to be a gladiator, it demanded certain things. Did I say the 5 musts and then I go to 4 on the next page? Sorry, guys. The 4 musts. You need to show fight, show ardor, give a good show, and if you die, die gracefully. Those are the rules of a gladiator. And so you can't just be like, I don't want to be here. And so if you don't want to be there, well, first of all, you're not going to be there very long. But the crowd in the front row is given hot pokers to literally goad you on to ardor, to fight. And so it's like, you can't just sit by and do nothing. It's sort of like, you have to get into this. There needs to be some fervor. This is a crowd and we want to see a fight. We want to see a good fight. And if you die gracefully. I'll go into these things in just a second. So fun Ludi fact number 5. The audience in the first rows held hot pokers. If the combatants didn't show proper ardor, they would prod them until they did. Fun Ludi fact number 6. The wooden gladiatorial training sword was known as a rudis. If the gladiator fought well to the satisfaction of the crowd, he could win a rudis in the arena, which was the highest honor, the ability to leave the arena a free man. So, in other words, you might fight well and not receive the rudis, but you still have your life. In other words, you survived for another day. But a gladiator always had this bait hanging out in front of him. It's like, and if you fight really well, you might receive the rudis. It's like, not only are you not condemned, but you actually leave a free man. It's like the populace themselves are like, give him the rudis. And it was sort of the democratic rule of mob. They actually were pleased by your performance. So it's an interesting psychological thing that is entering into this. And then, so we have, what do we call it was called the rudis, and now we have the ludus. So this is another one that feels very similar to my name, even though I know my name is not Eric Ludus, but for whatever reason, I feel connected to this somehow, some way. The gladiatorial training school. So where all the combatants were trained for the Ludy, they were trained in the ludus. And this was an elaborate system. I mean, they had multiple tiers. I mean, you think sort of like the Major League Baseball scouting system, that's nothing compared to this. I mean, this is an entire empire where they're looking for warriors and they're looking for people. So they would enslave people too, and actually put them into the ludus and to train them. And their only hope was that they could get the rudis and the wooden sword equivalent in the arena and be set free. So it's like, hey, you're a slave now. However, there is one way out, and that's to train as a gladiator, to win as a gladiator, to show your stuff as a gladiator, and to get the rudis by training in the ludus. So it's interesting because those that trained in the ludus were known as doctores. Oh, wow, we have all sorts of Latin specialists in here. So, but that's fascinating to me because I remember I was talking with Dan McConaughey. I think Nathan was in the conversation too. We were talking about different levels of training that we could bring at Ellerslie. So we had this one thought of like a doctoral level of training at Ellerslie. And one of the things I remember Dan McConaughey saying is technically in the history of doctoral work, it doesn't just mean that you have the knowledge of a subject. It's that you have the knowledge and are able to train someone to have the same capacity and knowledge as you have. So it's not just having knowledge, it's having the ability to impart that knowledge. And so it's interesting because the ludus was run by the doctores, the doctors. They were the ones that were previous champions. They likely received the rudis. They are the champions that have survived the gladiatorial combat, and now they train the best of the best. So the gladiatorial trainers, famous gladiators that won their freedom and now are teaching others how to fight to win theirs. Fun Ludi fact number 7. There were at least 14 different sorts of gladiator styles, some with a lot of armor, but slow to move and limited in visibility. For instance, you could have these big helmets that would definitely protect your head, but you had these teeny eye holes, very purposely. In other words, no one's going to be able to, get you in the head region, which is, of course, your most vulnerable territory. However, you can't see. So if you have a quick moving character that gets behind you, and so the key is that person had to always have a straight on view. But they would oftentimes match up someone with heavy armor that was slow of movement, but a lot of power, with someone with no armor. And so could you imagine being the character with no armor against this guy with a huge battle axe and armor? And yet you have advantage because you can move swiftly and quickly, but that's all part of the strategy. So in the Ludus, they train both of them how to counteract the strengths of the other. And so your strategic mind, any of you that like games and things like that, you're just intrigued by things like this, And that's precisely what happens. I mean, if you like board games, just imagine what this was like for a culture. So they would match up strategic things, even the best of both ones. It's like, this is the champion from this one. This is the one. They're both seeking the Rudis. And then you'd match up the best, but the most opposites. And then what's going to happen to Rome? Everyone wants to be there. And so, but not everyone can fit in the arena. So what happens? Riots and people, get killed because they want to get in. I mean, this is craziness at the highest level. So I didn't finish this. I said some with a lot of armor, but slow to move and limited in visibility, and some with little to no armor, but highly vulnerable to a heavy strike. These 14 would be matched up in such a way that most tantalized and intrigued the Roman audience, i.e. heavy armor versus no armor. Dying gracefully. When it was determined by the Ludi editor, believe it or not, that's what it's called. So if Janae Brazil was in here, who edits our books, it's like she's the Ludi editor, right? But when it was determined by the Ludi editor, that's the editor of the games. So it's someone that is actually going to be defining how things work. So there's always these issues, like someone's injured. Should they continue to fight? And then oftentimes it came to this person has fallen, and then the gladiator would look up to see if he had the approval to finish him off. And the editor would make the decision because he might want to keep him for a future one because he's worth a lot to Rome. I mean, this has value. This is a good warrior. But at other times, the crowd starts chanting, and so he might, do the thumbs down, and that poor guy is gone for. But if you're gone for as a gladiator, there's a certain way that you're supposed to die. And I want you to think about this in light of the fact that this is all happening at the time that Christ is going to go into the arena. Now, we don't think of the cross as being an arena, but he's surrounded, he's encircled, everything about it. It's a spectacle. It's even what it's called, which is exactly what this was. It's a spectacle in the way that he is going to defeat his foe. Seemingly outgunned, outmanned, totally stripped. He's nailed to two pieces of wood, and he's going to take down the greatest enemy in history. That's an impressive conquest, and he's going to do it silent as a lamb. And it's interesting because just in context here, there's a certain way, it was called a ceremonial death, that these gladiators were supposed to die with. They were trained in the Ludus this way, that if you're going to die and be remembered well, then you die with dignity, you die quietly, you die willingly without making noise. Isn't that just interesting in light of what we understand at the cross and even how the cross is foretold in the Old Testament? So the combatant would submit his body to the other gladiator. But you could just imagine what that'd be like. You're fighting to the death, and now it's been determined that it's your time to die. And you submit, sort of like a lamb submitting to the slaughter. The triumphant gladiator would, and I'm not going to go into it, believe me, that wouldn't be at all edifying to us, would kill him ceremoniously. The gladiator would allow this and not make a sound in his death. This was a noble death, approved by the Roman populace and practiced by every gladiator in the Ludus. This is what they were trained for. So, wild beast hunts. Exotic animals, rhinos, elephants, tigers, lions, panthers, and bears were imported for these events. So then they would starve the animals, they would antagonize the animals, and then they would release the animals. But this was, at the beginning, was going to be just entertainment, sort of like a bullfight, where you have a warrior, a gladiator-like warrior, but he was a hunter that would be set in the arena with these wild beasts, and he would hunt them. And so the audience would be intrigued by his methods because he was an expert of animal behavior and he knew how to actually kill the animal. And of course, it always commenced with the animal being killed, just like in a bullfight. So you want to know where bullfights came from? Probably from this. Same concept, actually. So I have a hunch that that's an AI-generated picture, guys. But and whether or not that's an actual way that it looked, I don't know, but this was the concept. Fun Ludy fact number 8. Very much like bullfighting in Spain, the ancient hunters would enter the arena against hungry, angry, antagonized beasts and seek to cruelly tantalize the animals, risking their lives against the fury of these creatures, in the hopes of ultimately slaying them to the great applause of the maniacal crowd. This is a fun one, especially since we haven't talked much about Nero yet, other than to know that he's a madman, right? Nero loved the games. So the games are going to be a huge deal to him, which is going to set us up for what we could call the Great Persecution. And understanding what you're hearing now is going to actually play into recognizing how the Christians are going to be persecuted. They're going to be persecuted in a way that pleases Rome. And you can already see that build up to this time. If there's a certain way that the populace says, feed us, O emperor, give us what we want. And so the emperor would supply the games on the dime of Rome. Rome sponsored all the games. They were free to attend if you were a Roman citizen. And you're like, how in the world did they make money? This was what pleased the populace. This is what made a healthy culture for them. And so you're going to see how the Christians are going to enter into this as the criminals. And they're going to then end up in the games. So listen to this. This is fun Ludy fact number 9. Nero himself actually entered the arena against a lion with only a dagger in his hand. Whoa, stop right there. That's incredible. So Nero, who by the way was not one of those great athletic characters that you would consider imposing, wanted to show his stuff, that he too can do this. So he enters into the arena against wild beasts, against a lion in this case, with only a dagger. Wow. Talk about boldness. Talk about courage. He defeated the lion to the awe and wonder of the onlooking crowd, lifting him to legendary status in the Ludy Hall of Fame. I made that up, Ludy Hall of Fame. I don't know that it exists, but conceptually it still did. Of course, his stature took a sharp nosedive when it was discovered that the beast was declawed, defanged, and drugged prior to his encounter with the emperor. Nero, you didn't. This happened at least twice, too, with another emperor, too. In other words, where they wanted the heroism, they wanted the worship, which is why they called themselves God and they commanded worship of the Roman Empire. They craved it, and they saw what the gladiators got, they saw what the charioteers got, and they craved it too. And just by supplying the entertainment did not necessarily meet that need within them. I want to be treated that way. I want to be seen as strong and mighty to kill wild beasts. So this is where we get to something that's very applicable to our time period between 64 and 70, and that is the public executions in the arena. So then the question is going to come about that what if these exotic animals, these rhinos, these elephants, these tigers, these lions, these panthers, and these bears could be placed in the same arena with unarmed people in order that the Roman citizens could enjoy seeing them torn from limb. I know, it's terrible to even put on the screen. However, this is going to be the maniacal development that's going to happen. And when Rome is burned and Nero blames it on the Christians, now you can sort of see a perfect storm setting up. And so many of us have heard about Christians being given into the arena and wild beasts coming after them. I mean, we've heard the stories of that. But to understand the context of that is very interesting because that wasn't actually how it originally was set up. It became an outlet. It was just like, hey, this is brilliant. This is entertaining. And to watch someone try and run for their life, instead of hunt the beast, what if the beast is hunting them? And of course, you have a continued breakdown morally of a culture. Fun Ludy fact number 10, whether or not you'd call it fun. In AD 64, Emperor Nero burned the city of Rome in hopes of creating some real estate for his golden house. When he began to catch wind of political backlash, he blamed the fire on the Christians. This began this new and extraordinary form of entertainment, public executions of the nasty arsonists, fire starters, known as Christians. 1 Corinthians 4:9. For it seems to me that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession, like those condemned to die in the arena. We have been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to angels as well as to human beings. Isn't that just a fascinating statement? Now, not every translation is going to use the word arena, but it is fascinating because that is contextually a perfect fit, because the spectacle was this concept. So here's what I'm going to say. We don't have a ludus like the gladiators did. Same way, it's not called the same thing, but we have it. It's called the church. The church is actually one of our primary agendas is to disciple. That's actually what we're doing, is taking our strength as gladiators and imparting it to those that are also called into the gladiatorial arena. Our gladiatorial arena doesn't come with weapons. That's one of the challenges that Christians have faced. It's like, wait a minute, so you're training me as a gladiator, oh Lord Jesus? Yes, but not as you would think. I'm not calling you to go in there and defeat in the same way, because your battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against panthers and bears and lions and rhinos. Your battle is different. But we are being trained to enter an arena, just as they were being groomed to enter the arena in Rome. I mean, it's rather profound when you ponder it. And to understand even what our role is, like Ellerslie is a ludus of all things. That's what we do. And what we have, whether or not any of us would have the audacity to call ourselves doctores, we are gladiators that fight battles. And we understand the battles that we fight. We understand those wild beasts. We understand what is coming to destroy us. And we know the tactics, we could say the best practices for gladiatorial encounters, for how to engage in the arena with that which is desiring to destroy you. And so as believers, it really actually helps to understand that concept, because when you are being trained and groomed, it's helpful to know what you're being trained and groomed for. Because many of us have the question, it's like, Jesus, you've saved me. I've believed in you. Why don't you just take me home? Instead, we're still here. Why? Why am I still here, Lord? Because I want to demonstrate my kingdom in and through you. Well, God, they're hostile. They don't even want me here. And yet it's in and through that engagement that we reveal the invisible realm, that we showcase the gospel power and life, and it gives us opportunity to testify of what causes us to be so different than the world. So we are trained for the arena, just a different arena. You see, our arena technically is in a spiritual realm. And our audience, did you know that there is an audience for our working? And it's a different audience than the Roman populace. But we actually are being groomed to contest with the enemy, to actually go to war against foul powers and to win and to overcome them. I know this sounds strange. Some of you are like, are you serious? That's actually even the language of Scripture. 1 Corinthians 9:24-27 is going to use the illustration of athletics multiple times in just this one little context. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. It's interesting because for those of us that are inclined towards athletics, which is me, I mean, I think in numbers, I think in athletics, so I resonate very quickly with athletic imagery. Because I like training the human body. I understand the obstacles. I remember running. I've never enjoyed running, which sounds terrible in light of what I just said. It's like, hey, Eric, if you're an athlete, you should enjoy running. Some people enjoy running. They actually get a thrill from it. I don't get that thrill. It's hard for me to train running. It's very boring for me. It's like I want to do something else. I remember it was a Kendrick movie, I think. It was Overcomer, where I think the son of the dad was complaining that running is very boring. I was like, boy, do I get that. It's like you need to turn it into a sport. Like you need to bop something, beat something up as you're going through it, jump over an obstacle. And that's the way I am. Give me a gymnastics, like overcome type of obstacle course. And I like that. I can respond to that with the endurance side. Now I can just throw the endurance side in. But it's interesting because I understand in all my training over the years what it means to run and what it means to run with that heart and that ardor and that fervency and just run. There's two different ways. And what you're going to see in the Roman system is there's two ways to enter into the arena. And that crowd is looking in going, come on, buddy. You're built to have fervency, to have heart, to have some kind of investment into this. And so they would do whatever they want with hot pokers and everything to try and get this gladiator to get into it. You know what Christianity is? It is not just being willing to walk into the arena, but it's willing to walk in knowing the significance of it. That there is a crowd that is leaning in, waiting for the gladiator to step in and do it with fervency and ardor and strength, and to use the best practices and the arts that God has given us to take down the devil, to actually throw him down, and to show with the weapons of warfare that are mighty, that are not carnal, but are heavenly, that we win. We demonstrate this in this other arena. Even in this earthly arena, we look like we lose. In the heavenly arena that truly matters, that supersedes anything in this natural realm, we win. So it says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. There's that word games. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave so that after I've preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. I'm training for something. It's sort of like our spiritual ludus, where we're saying, okay, I know what I'm being fitted for. I know that I'm a gladiator. I just accept it. Because in a strange sense, a gladiator has a tough tension in their life. They look at these people that are not gladiators, that are just free. You know, the Roman senator that's sitting there being fed grapes. You know, it's like, come on, why can't I have that life? Instead, you have a life of difficulty. You have a life of constant training, a life of constant athletic fitness. You are literally risking your life every day that you enter into that arena. And you have no guarantee that you'll ever get out of this arena unless you die. And it's like, that is not a bad depiction of what we live in. Once we become a Christian, in a sense, we enter into a ludus. We give up our freedom as the Roman senator, and we enter into gladiatorial combat. And it's like we're slaves, but not to an evil taskmaster, but to a doctorus of gladiator fighting. The one who is the greatest fighter in all of history is our master, and he will train us how to win as he won. And that is a unique lens on Christianity. Colossians 2:15. Having disarmed principalities and powers, Jesus made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. Now again, this is in a different arena, guys, because down here on earth, you look at this very moment in history, this spectacle, and you might not see it. Yeah, there's a little crowd around, and a storm's going to come, there's an earthquake, and all's going to go dark. But it looks like just a guilty man died. Yeah, he died in a pretty spectacular way, I have to admit, right? He died gracefully. He died as a true gladiator should. But still, is that a public spectacle? You see, there's another arena in which this was being fought. And Jesus disarmed the enemy, stripped him naked in front of the onlooking heavenlies. The heavenlies, the Hellies, if you want to say it that way, hell and all heaven are seeing it. They are beholding the defeat of the devil. Jesus did that, but it's in a different arena. He did this in an arena to the awestruck wonder of the heavens. That's where we fight our battles. The thrill of the game. Could it be that we are designed for a heavenly game? I've actually done a whole series on this in the past. It's called The Dangerous Edge. And it's a series that I give specifically on this idea of how we appropriate danger and difficulty as a Christian, and how God gave us an instinct for the game, that we are to engage in this with enthusiasm and fervor, but not according to the flesh. You see, what you see in Rome is a fleshly response to this part of who we are. Just like you see, and I give all sorts of illustrations in that series of like rock climbing, like free solo rock climbing on cliffs, where people are looking for a rush. This guy had this one picture of a guy in a tent hanging off of a cliff face, like downward. I mean, I don't even know how he would get out of it. And he has a smile on his face. It's like he's actually enjoying himself. And all of us would just look and say, that's utter stupidity. Yet what he's doing is he's risking everything and enjoying it. You see, we as humans are designed for danger. We're designed to risk it all for something, but just not something earthly. Like, who cares about the money? Who cares about the applause of the crowd? What about the representation of Jesus on this earth? We have the highest calling, and we are called to this. And so it's caused me to wonder, imagine this. You see, the emperor always got into this too. So the king would always be sitting there as like a big deal to the king too, or the emperor of Rome. And they had a thrill in this, like Caligula, Nero, they loved this. Isn't it just an interesting thought to think that what if our king actually really enjoys this game too? To call it a game makes it sound like he's playing with us, right? And I know he's not. However, is it possible that what he engaged in and what he's called us to engage in is actually supposed to be joyful? It's not supposed to be morose. We have such a unique lens at how we look at challenge, how we look at persecution, but yet everything in the Bible says rejoice. Everything. You bring it up and you just look up a scripture, you're going to see that the answer in the New Testament is, so we leap for joy. Oh, we're falsely accused. Yeah, that's why we leap. You're leaping? You were falsely accused. We face trials of many kinds. We consider this the highest form of joy. What in the world's wrong with these people? Or what is right with these people? And so imagine our king as we enter into the arena. He's our doctores. He is the gladiator that has gone before us, that has trained us. And he actually is not just there cheering us, he's inside of us, enabling us to fight in a manner that we never could otherwise. And I'm not talking about a physical arena. I'm talking about a spiritual arena. The games. What if we played our games, which I sort of like, because maybe it's because my name is Ludy and it means game. If you think about that, that is a weird statement. But if you follow me around in life, I turn every single thing into a game. I do every single thing. If we're doing a boring task, I'll usually turn it into a game. I'll turn it into a timed thing. It's like, okay, we need to do this faster than we did last time. I will always do that to myself. I gamify life. So it's interesting that that my name would turn out to, in the old Roman Empire, mean game or games. But what if I did all of that instinct that I have to enjoy every moment of life, to do this for a higher purpose? What if I did that unto my king? Hebrews 12. So this is a profound statement. We just finished up Hebrews 11. This is going to start in with a therefore, and it's sort of hard to ever start with a therefore in a scripture because obviously there was something before this. But it's talking about the hall of fame of faith, all those great characters that have gone before us and what they have sacrificed, suffered, but they believed. That was their chief marker. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witness. Now, what's interesting is the word cloud to me always stands out as like, why do they always translate it as cloud? And yet, because it could mean throng, like multiple people, like a huge arena full, Circus Maximus type of arena. That's what it can mean. And this language, just think about the time period in which this is taking place and being written, is all in this time period where there were spectacles, where there were throngs, where there were clouds of witness that would surround these spectacles that were taking place. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, now here you are all by yourself thinking, I don't see anyone watching my life. And yet, we're living our life out in a different arena. And there is a great throng that is leaning in. Whether that we just say it's the angels or those that have gone before us, I can't answer that. I don't know how the arena works and how the crowd system works. However, I do know that we are doing something far more significant than we realize we're doing. And when we're training to compete in this arena, to engage with these hostile, dark foes, that God is intending us to win, that He has given us weaponry, and He wants to train us how to use it so that we can deftly and adeptly take down our enemy and show the highest heaven and the lowest hell, God is victor. So therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, our doctorus, our great gladiator that went before us. Do you not see how He did it? And now He, who is the author and finisher of our ability to do this, our faith fight, He says, lay down anything that's going to hinder you from functioning well in this arena. You can too follow in this heritage of faith that is before us, and you can fight like Jesus. The new glasses. So right now, we could look at this world and we see fanaticism. I mean, we're in the middle of the Olympics, right? So it's like if you ever want to see the ultimate celebration of human achievement, that's the Olympics. And yet, no one seems to notice your training and what you are giving yourself to. There's no like big audience for you. And you can oftentimes feel so smallish in this thing. When you're a Christian, boy, the devil's entire agenda is to make you feel small. And yet, you are of the utmost significance on earth right now. You are God's chief vessel through which to reveal His power, His might, His majesty. So I want each of us to afresh today remember that we actually are engaged in a battle, that we are engaged in the games, we are being prepared to demonstrate to the highest heaven, the lowest hell. What did I call them? The hellies, like the heavenlies, the hellies? That could be, we could, brand that. That could be a term. We are called to showcase. So these are the new glasses. We need to take off the earthly ones. We need to put on new ones. And we need to recognize our new arena, our new opponent. Our battle isn't against flesh and blood. We're not against the greens or the reds or the blues if we're a white. We're not in a factionis. Did I say factionis? Oh boy, now I don't know how I pronounce that. We're not in factions as a church. We have a new opponent, and it's not the other members of the body of Christ. We have a new crowd. You see, we're not trying to appease the people of this earth. We're not trying to appease Emperor Nero. We're pleasing our heavenly King. It's like, well, I don't see Him. I do. We are after a different crowd of witness than this earth is after. We have a new end game. Our end game isn't to win the Rudis. Our end game is to please our King, is to honor Him. And when we die, we want to die like He died. Now I'll read this whole line again because it is rather profound. A new arena, a new opponent, a new crowd, a new end game, but the same classic struggle. When you see these struggles in the games, you see the gladiatorial combats, you're actually seeing a picture that actually helps you better understand what you're engaged in, which is why you're going to see the writers of the New Testament refer to it, to say it's like this. It's like running a race. It's like being in the arena. It's like this. And isn't it a fascinating statement? It's like a chariot race. It's like it's like being in an arena as a hunter with a wild beast. It's like that. And you have a great crowd of witness that is surrounding this spectacle, and they're desiring you to actually rise up and show yourself strong. Put the ardor, put the fervency in it. Do this for Jesus. Yeah. Now that's a vision. Father, I ask that you would plant this deep within us, that we would understand this in a very practical and personal way. Lord, thank you for your truth. We love you so much. Amen.